The showroom is a palace of glass, steel, and blinding lights. Ethan, a father in a faded jacket, steps inside, holding his son Liam's hand. The sales staff scans them with cold professional judgment. "Sir, we are by appointment only," a salesman says, blocking their path. Ethan calmly offers his name. The salesman shakes his head, smirking. "You're not a buyer, sir. Please leave." Liam bows his head, feeling the sting of rejection. Suddenly, a low tectonic rumble shakes the floor. A custom-built titanium silver supercar rolls slowly into the lot. The driver steps out, ignoring the manager rushing toward him, and calls, "Mr. Carter, ready!" Ethan Carter was 44 years old, and if you saw him on the street, you wouldn't think much of him. He was a man of grease, gears, and quiet patience. His hands were mapped with small scars, reminders of slipped wrenches and hot engine blocks. And his eyes had the steady, distant look of someone who spent more time looking at blueprints than at a television screen. He was a single father whose world revolved around two things: his son, Liam, and the roaring mechanical soul of a high-performance engine. Liam was 9, and for as long as he could breathe, he had loved cars. Not just the way they looked under the bright lights of a magazine, but the way they felt. To Liam, a car wasn't just a piece of metal, it was a living story. Every night, while other kids were being read fairy tales, Liam sat on a stool in their cramped backyard garage. He watched the sparks fly from his father's welder. He smelled the sharp scent of gasoline and the sweet, heavy aroma of new oil. For the last 6 years, he had watched his father write the greatest story of all in that garage. Ethan wasn't a billionaire. He wasn't a tech mogul with a private jet. He was a master mechanical engineer, a man who had walked away from high-paying corporate contracts to specialize in the impossible restoration of high-performance vintage cars. He was the man the billionaires called when their prized possessions broke down and the factory said they couldn't be fixed. While other men spent their weekends at exclusive golf courses or on yachts, Ethan spent his under the chassis of a rare, limited edition supercar he had salvaged from a wreckage in Europe 6 years ago. It had taken 6 years. 6 years of searching through dusty archives in Germany for obscure parts. 6 years of hand-tuning the transmission until it shifted with the precision of a Swiss watch. 6 years of ensuring that every single bolt was tightened to the exact Newton meter required by the original manufacturer's secret specifications. This car was his masterpiece. It was a one-of-a-kind restoration that combined classic aesthetics with modern, cutting-edge internals. To Ethan, it was a debt of honor to the engineers who had built the original. To Liam, it was a silver lightning bolt. The journey had been grueling. There were nights when Ethan hadn't slept, his eyes burning under the glow of a shop light as he tried to figure out a cooling system that had been obsolete for decades. There were months when they ate simple meals so Ethan could afford a single original gasket from a collector in Japan. Liam never complained. He just helped his dad organize the sockets and wipe the grease off the tools. They were a team. Finally, the car was finished. Ethan had reached out to a world-renowned showroom, the Apex Gallery. He didn't want to sell it for a quick buck to some flipper who would hide it in a climate-controlled basement. He wanted to consign it for a prestigious auction where it would be recognized for the engineering feat it was. He had a confirmed appointment. He had a digital confirmation code. But when he arrived at the showroom on that rainy Tuesday, the world of the elite didn't see the master engineer. They saw a blue-collar man in a rainy jacket. He wore jeans that had been washed so many times they were nearly white at the knees. He looked like a man who had come to fix the air conditioning or perhaps deliver the lunch order. Not a man who owned one of the most valuable pieces of automotive history in the city. The receptionist, a woman named Chloe with perfectly manicured nails and a gaze that could freeze water, didn't even look at the computer when Ethan gave his name. She looked at his boots that had spent the morning walking through the garage. She looked at Liam's slightly messy hair, damp from the rain. She didn't bother checking the special consignment list, a high-security tab that few were authorized to view. She only checked the VIP buyer list, looking for names like Rockefeller or Musk. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice dripping with a type of politeness that felt like a slap. "We are hosting an exclusive launch event today for the new Veloz collection. The public is not allowed inside. This is a closed-door event for our top-tier clients. Ethan remained calm, his voice as steady as a Torque wrench. I understand, but I have an appointment with the managing director, Mr. Sterling. My name is Ethan Carter. Please check the consignment schedule. She tilted her head, a patronizing, pitying smile on her face, as if she were talking to a child who had lost his way. Mr. Carter, I think you might have the wrong address. We sell cars here that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Perhaps there's a used car lot down the street that you're looking for? You're clearly not a buyer, and we don't have time for tourists today. Liam looked up at his father, his eyes filled with a mixture of confusion and a deep, burning shame. He didn't understand why these people, surrounded by such beautiful machines, could be so ugly on the inside. He saw the way the other guests, men in $5,000 suits, were looking at them. Ethan just squeezed his son's hand, a silent signal of strength. He didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "It's okay, Liam. The world has a way of showing you who people really are. Let's just wait for a moment." The air inside the Apex Gallery was thick with the scent of expensive cologne, fine leather, and the crisp, metallic tang of cold champagne. The wealthy clients moved like sharks through the water, their voices a low murmur of talk about interest rates, stock options, and carbon fiber weaves. None of them noticed the man and the boy standing near the entrance. In this temple of wealth, Ethan and Liam were invisible, or worse, they were an eyesore. Ethan approached the desk again, this time standing his ground. "I'm not here to buy, and I'm not here to look. I am here to deliver a vehicle for the Heritage Auction. Check the schedule again." The salesman who had blocked him earlier, a man named Marcus with teeth too white and a suit too tight, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. He turned to a group of VIPs nearby, gesturing toward Ethan. "Did you hear that? He's here to deliver a vehicle. What, are you driving a tow truck now, pal? The delivery bay is in the back, behind the dumpsters. And honestly, we don't take scrap metal or trade-ins on event days, especially not from people who look like they walked here." The rejection wasn't just cold, it was public. A few of the VIP guests turned their heads, whispering and chuckling behind their crystal glasses. They saw a working-class man trying to force his way into a world where he didn't belong. They saw a man who didn't speak their language of brands and status. Marcus leaned in, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Look, buddy, you're making the guests uncomfortable. You're scaring the investors. Just go. Take the kid and go get a burger or something. This isn't for you." Ethan looked Marcus directly in the eye. He didn't feel anger. He felt a strange kind of pity for the man. Marcus was a gatekeeper who didn't even know what he was guarding. He was a man who knew the price of everything, but the value of nothing. Ethan knew that within the hour, Marcus's world was going to shift on its axis. He didn't feel the need to prove himself through words. Words were cheap. Engineering was absolute. "I'll wait outside," Ethan said quietly. "But I wouldn't go too far if I were you. You're about to have a very busy afternoon." They stood on the sidewalk, the rain misting against the massive glass panels of the showroom. Inside, the party continued. The music, a sophisticated, upbeat jazz, hummed through the walls. 10 minutes passed. The VIPs continued their chatter, oblivious to the man in the rain. Then the atmosphere changed. A massive, enclosed professional transport truck, the kind with no markings, used only for the most delicate prototypes and priceless museum pieces, pulled slowly into the driveway. It didn't have a logo. It didn't need one. Its sheer size and the way it moved with silent, hydraulic precision signaled its importance. It didn't go to the back delivery bay as Marcus had suggested. It stopped right in front of the main glass doors, blocking the view of the street. It was an act of dominance. The hydraulic ramp lowered with a long, metallic hiss that sounded like a giant exhaling. A driver in a pristine, black uniform, wearing white gloves, stepped out. He held a carbon fiber clipboard. He didn't look at the showroom. He didn't look at the flashing lights. He looked straight at the man standing in the rain with the little boy. "Mr. Carter," the driver called out, his voice echoing against the glass. "The asset has arrived. We're ready for your inspection before unloading." The showroom went dead silent. The music seemed to stop on its own. Mr. Sterling, the managing director, stepped out of his glass-walled office on the second floor, alerted by the sight of the massive transport. He saw the truck. He saw the driver. Most importantly, he saw the man the driver was talking to. Marcus, the salesman, hurried outside, his face a mask of confusion. Wait, there must be a huge mistake. This is a VIP event. You can't park this tank here. Get it out of the driveway. The driver didn't even glance at Marcus. He remained focused on Ethan. The car is ready, sir. The engine has been pre-warmed for the display as per your instructions. The diagnostic levels are all in the green. She's running perfectly. Mr. Sterling hurried down the stairs, nearly tripping over his own feet. He pushed past Marcus and the receptionist. He snatched the guest list from Chloe's hand and frantically scrolled through the tablet. He didn't find the name in the buyer section. He didn't find it in the press section. He found it in a section titled Tier 1 Heritage Consignments. The file was encrypted. It required a level 5 security clearance just to open. When he finally bypassed the lock, a profile picture of a 1998 Lost Series Supercar appeared, along with the name of the restorer. Wait, Sterling whispered, his face turning a ghostly shade of pale. Ethan, Carter, the master of the Silver Ghost, the man who rebuilt the Sultan's engine from a pile of ash? He looked out the window. He saw the man in the faded jacket. He saw the grease-stained cuffs. He realized with a jolt of pure terror that the tourist he had allowed his staff to insult was the very man his business had been courting for 3 years. The car was a 1/5 limited edition, a vehicle so rare that most collectors believed it didn't exist anymore. Fully restored with a proprietary modern drivetrain that maintained the original soul but added the power of a modern jet. Estimated value, 8 figures. It was the holy grail of the upcoming auction. The spotlight in the showroom literally stopped moving. The salesman, the snobbish guests, the receptionist, everyone was now frozen, staring through the glass at the man in the old jacket. The rain was still falling on him, but he looked like the most powerful person in the city. The crowd of millionaires and billionaires pressed against the windows like excited schoolchildren as the silver titanium supercar rolled off the ramp. It didn't just move, it glided with a predatory grace that made every other car in the showroom look like a plastic toy. The color wasn't just paint, it was a depth of liquid metal, 13 layers of hand-polished finish that seemed to swallow the light and spit it back out as pure, blinding brilliance. This wasn't a new car that had rolled off an assembly line. This was something much rarer. It was a soul that had been resurrected by the hands of a man who understood the heartbeat of a machine. Ethan walked toward the car as the driver opened the door. His movements were confident and practiced. He didn't look like a stranger in a palace anymore. He looked like the creator who had designed the palace itself. He reached in and touched the steering wheel, a custom-milled piece of aeronautical aluminum wrapped in leather that had been stitched by hand over 100 hours. "Is this yours, Dad?" Liam whispered, his voice trembling with a mix of pride and shock. "No, Liam," Ethan replied, his voice carrying through the quiet air. "This is ours. This is the 6 years we spent in the dark. This is the answer to every person who told us we couldn't do it." The technical team from the showroom, men who usually acted like they knew everything about cars, rushed out. Their initial arrogance had vanished, replaced by an almost religious intensity of curiosity. They were professionals and they knew quality. But they had never seen a restoration like this. They had never seen a car where the gaps between the panels were measured in microns, or where the engine bay was as clean as a surgical suite. Ethan didn't just hand over the keys. He reached into the car and pulled out a leather-bound dossier. It was over 200 pages thick, bound in the same silver leather as the car's interior. It contained every blueprint, every thermal test, every metallurgical analysis of the parts he had fabricated. It was a masterpiece of documentation that would be studied by engineers for decades. "The drivetrain has been completely re-engineered," Ethan explained to the lead mechanic, who was now kneeling on the wet pavement just to get a better look. "The original block was cracked, so I reinforced it with a titanium sleeve insert. I've tuned it for 900 horsepower, but the power delivery is linear. It won't bite the driver unless they ask it to. I've balanced the weight distribution to exactly 49 to 51. The suspension is active and laser-guided, but I've kept the analog feedback through the steering rack. A driver should feel the road, not just read about it on a screen. He wasn't bragging. He wasn't using marketing buzzwords like Marcus. He was speaking the language of physics, of heat dissipation, of friction coefficients. It was a language only a few in that room truly understood, the language of perfection. Mr. Sterling was now standing next to Ethan, his hands trembling slightly as he looked at the VIN number etched into the chassis. This is the lost chassis from the 1998 series. We thought this was destroyed in the factory fire in Turin. Every archive says it's gone. It was gone to people who didn't want to look for it, Ethan said, looking Sterling in the eye. I found it in a scrapyard in a village no one visits. I spent 3 years just straightening the alloy using laser-guided thermal tensioning because I refused to use a single piece of non-original frame. The VIP guests, the men who had been laughing and making jokes about tow trucks minutes ago, were now crowding around the car, their champagne glasses forgotten. They weren't looking at Ethan's old jacket anymore. They were looking at his hands, the hands that had built the impossible. They saw the scars now, not as signs of poverty, but as badges of mastery. A famous collector, a man whose private garage was worth more than some small countries, walked up. He didn't look at the manager. He didn't look at the salesman. He walked straight to Ethan and extended a hand. I've been looking for this model for 20 years. I've sent scouts to every continent. No one could find one, let alone one in this condition. How did you do it? How did a man working alone out-engineer a factory team? Ethan didn't give a polished PR speech. He talked about the struggle. He talked about the freezing nights in the garage when the heater broke and he had to work in a parka. He talked about the nights he spent watching Liam sleep on a pile of blankets in the corner of the shop because he couldn't afford a babysitter and didn't want to stop working. He talked about the 6 years of silence, of being ignored, and of working toward a goal that only he could see. Inside the showroom, the staff was in a frenzy. The spotlight was physically moved by the stage crew. The center stage, the most prestigious spot in the building, currently occupied by a brand new factory model, was cleared in record time. The new Veloce was pushed into a corner like an embarrassing mistake. Liam stood next to his father, his chest puffed out so far it nearly hurt. He saw the way the world was looking at his dad now. He saw the salesman who had been so tall and arrogant, now looking small and desperate. He realized that the comment, "You're not a buyer," didn't matter. Because being a buyer only required money. Being his father required something much, much rarer. The transition was jarring. One moment, Ethan and Liam were being ushered toward the exit. The next, they were being led to the private VIP lounge on the mezzanine. Mr. Sterling himself was carrying Ethan's dossier like it was a holy relic. Marcus the salesman was nowhere to be found. He had retreated to the break room, his career flashing before his eyes. But Mr. Sterling didn't let him hide. He called Marcus and Chloe, the receptionist, to the center of the showroom floor. "Mr. Carter," Sterling said, his voice loud enough to resonate through the entire building, "I want to personally apologize, not just as a businessman, but as a human being. We pride ourselves on recognizing excellence. But today, we failed miserably. We judged the cover of the book and ignored the masterpiece inside. We treated you with a lack of dignity that has no place in this gallery." He turned to Marcus and Chloe. "Apologize, now." Marcus's face was the color of a ripe tomato. He stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Ethan's boots, the same boots he had mocked. I am deeply sorry, Mr. Carter. I was unprofessional. I made assumptions I had no right to make. I hope you can forgive my ignorance." Ethan didn't demand Marcus be fired. He didn't ask for a public shaming. He simply looked at the young man, his gaze calm and piercing. "I don't need your apology, Marcus," Ethan said, "but I do suggest you rethink your career. If you only respect people who look like they already have what you want, you will never find anything truly valuable. A person's worth isn't in their bank account, and their knowledge isn't in their clothes. If my son hadn't been here, I would have walked away, and you would have lost the most important asset this showroom has ever seen. Not because of the car, but because of the trust." The manager nodded, humbled by Ethan's lack of spite. Ethan's name was officially added to the legacy partner list, a list that bypasses every gatekeeper and every receptionist in every Apex gallery in the world. The event shifted completely. It was no longer a corporate launch party. It became an impromptu seminar on the art of the machine. The billionaire collector sat down with Ethan, and they didn't talk about price. They talked about the why. They discussed the evolution of aerodynamics and the philosophy of driver-centric design. It was a professional negotiation between equals. There was no shouting, no ego, just two men discussing the art of the machine. Liam sat in a plush velvet chair, a glass of high-end orange juice in his hand, watching his father. People who had ignored him an hour ago were now coming up to him, asking him what it was like to grow up with such a genius. Liam just smiled. He didn't care about the genius. He cared that his dad was finally being seen. Later, in a quiet moment, Liam pulled on his father's sleeve. "Dad, why didn't you get mad at them? Why didn't you tell them how much the car was worth right at the start?" Ethan knelt down so he was at eye level with his son. He placed a hand on Liam's shoulder. "Liam, remember this for the rest of your life. Anger is like a broken engine. It makes a lot of noise, it burns a lot of fuel, but it doesn't get you a single mile down the road. Excellence is the only thing that speaks loud enough to change a person's mind. You don't have to shout when you have the results. Anger doesn't turn the key. Results do." That was the real lesson. Not the silver car, not the seven-figure check that was being discussed, but the quiet dignity of doing the work so well that the world has no choice but to pay attention. By the time the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same shades of orange and purple as a classic supercar's leather, Ethan's car was the only thing anyone was talking about. The story of the garage master had already begun to spread through the group chats of the world's elite. It wasn't because of a fake pour stunt or a calculated social media move. It was because the quality of the work was undeniable. In a world of replicas and mass-produced luxury, Ethan had brought them the truth. Ethan didn't sell the car that night, despite several offers that would have bought him a mansion and 10 more garages. Instead, he signed a long-term exhibition and partnership contract. The showroom would display the car as their centerpiece for 6 months, and Ethan would receive a significant percentage of the door fees and a consulting retainer to help them verify and restore other rare assets. He had turned a one-time sale into a legacy business. As they prepared to leave, the staff of the showroom did something they had never done for a man in a work jacket. They stood in 2 lines near the door. This time, they didn't block the path. They opened the massive glass doors wide. They bowed their heads slightly as Ethan and Liam passed through. The transport truck was gone, having delivered its precious cargo. Ethan's old, reliable SUV, a vehicle that had hauled 1,000 parts and 100 bags of groceries, was parked at the far end of the lot, looking humble under the streetlights. "They thought you weren't a buyer, Dad," Liam said as he climbed into the passenger seat, buckling his seatbelt. Ethan started the engine. The old SUV rumbled to life, a familiar, comforting sound. He looked back at the glowing glass building where his silver masterpiece now sat under the brightest spotlights in the city, surrounded by guards and admirers. He smiled and put the car into gear. "I wasn't a buyer, Liam. I was the owner. I was the creator. And in this world, it's much easier to buy something than it is to build it. Always remember which one you want to be." They drove home, leaving the champagne, the suits, and the fake smiles behind. The world thought the spotlight came from money. They thought it was the car that brought the light. But Ethan knew the truth as he looked at his son, who was already falling asleep against the window. The spotlight came from the grease under his fingernails, the 6 years of silence, and the refusal to let the world define his worth. The silver car was just metal. The real masterpiece was the man who refused to be invisible. If you believe that a person's value isn't in the clothes they wear, subscribe for more stories of hidden excellence. Leave a comment. Have you ever been judged by your appearance? How did you prove them wrong? Let's discuss below.